readers who are new to the books.
The character who romps across the pages of this month's choice is a cad, a poltroon, a deceiving braggart, a seducer of other men's wives. Yet he does seem to be rather popular. Harry Flashman is George McDonald Fraser's anti-hero, emerging from the imagined archive of papers found by the author wrapped in oilskin in an attic. Their memoirs, we're asked to believe, telling the story of Flashman's escapades after his expulsion from rugby by Dr. Arnold in Tom Brown's school days, for, of course, excessive drunkenness. Our readers in Manchester this month have in front of them the first of the 12 volumes of the Flashman papers, called simply Flashman, written in the late 60s. We're in Manchester because it's the city nearest to the home of George MacDonald Fraser, and we've got a fine mixture of readers, some members of local book groups, some school students, some die-hard Flashman fans. Some have travelled here from as far away as London and Exeter. And of course we've, as always, got some readers who are coming to the book and the books in the whole series for the first time. In this first volume, Flashman fights in the Afghan campaign around 1840, pursues women, young and old, which is a habit, conceals his cowardly retreat from battle, and gets a medal he doesn't deserve presented to him by Queen Victoria herself, with Prince Albert and the Duke of Wellington looking on. Now, these are the sorts of adventures he always has. He charges around and behaves quite badly, sometimes very badly indeed, and tells his own story in a fashion that reeks of imperial bravado, but which is, above all, human and funny. George MacDonald Fraser, welcome to Book Club. Why do you think that people have developed such an attraction for such an awful man?
People like rascals. They like rogues. When you think of the popular heroes, Robin Hood, Falstaff, if they're funny, it helps.
Did you know that before you started, or was it chance?
I didn't know that. Mind you, I was always on the side of the villain. When I was a child and went to movies, I wanted Basil Rathbone to kill Errol Flynn.
Do you think we're of two types? Some who want the baddie to win and some who want the goodie to win?
Yes, there's a sneaking sympathy for the baddie, always.
Let's bring the audience in. Young chap here, yeah.
What inspired you to write the series?
I didn't want to go on being deputy editor of the Glasgow Herald for 20 years.
A most understandable feeling.
And I decided I'd like to write a Victorian novel. What put Flashman into my mind, I don't know. I'd obviously read him when I was a boy and wondered what happened to him.
Did you grow up with the kind of books whose style is encapsulated really in the Flashman series, Buchan, Henty and all the rest of it, that
Absolutely.
kind of, that sort of schoolboy world?
My father won a lot of prizes at school in the 90s. R.M. Ballantyne, that kind of thing.
The Coral Island.
The Coral Island, and I devoured them. My love affair with the Victorian era started then.
Well, let's introduce Flashman as he appears at the very beginning of the book. Here he is being introduced. These mysterious papers, as you insist on telling us, were found in an attic. It's the beginning of Flashman's adventures after school.
Hughes got it wrong in one important detail. You'll have read in Tom Brown how I was expelled from rugby school for drunkenness, which is true enough. But when Hughes alleges that this was the result of my deliberately pouring beer on top of gin punch, he is in error. I knew better than to mix my drinks even at 17. I mention this not in self-defence but in the interests of strict truth. This story will be completely truthful. I am breaking the habit of 80 years. Why shouldn't I? When a man's as old as I am and knows himself thoroughly for what he is and was, he doesn't care much. I'm not ashamed, you see, never was. And I've enough on the credit side, a knighthood, Victoria Cross, high rank, some popular fame, so I can look at the picture above my desk of the young officer in Cardigan's Hussars, tall, masterful and roughly handsome, and say that this is the portrait of a scoundrel, a liar, a cheat, a thief, a coward, and, oh yes, a toady. Hughes said more or less all these things, and his description was pretty fair, except in matters of detail, such as the one I've mentioned. But he was more concerned to preach a sermon than to give facts. I'm concerned with facts, and since many of them are discreditable to me, you can rest assured they are true. I'm rather diffident about reading that because Flashman has been played by so many brilliant performers.
Yes, indeed.
Joss Ackland and Timothy West and Peter Bowles and Malcolm McDowell. and I can't do it nearly as well as they do.
But well, you're his creator, at least in his adult life. The question here.
I was just wondering, why did you decide to make up the existence of the Flashman papers instead of just writing it as a novel on its own?
You mean pretending it's...
Yeah, pretending that it's from these
real.
papers.
That is the fault of two people for whom I have an immense admiration, Sir Walter Scott and Sabatini, both of whom are footnoters. And I thought it would be good fun to have footnotes, and it would be good fun to have a sort of spoof introduction saying that this was a manuscript that was discovered, blah, blah, blah. I never thought anyone would believe it.
But some of the reviewers originally believed it, didn't they?
1/3 of American reviewers believed it. But no one in Britain.
One of the things that intrigues me, and I don't know whether anybody wants to bring this up, is Flashman's character, because you've talked about the attraction of the rascal. But of course, as a soldier, he does, in many ways, the worst thing imaginable in this first book. He pretends to have done something brave when, in fact, he's done something cowardly. He gets a medal that he shouldn't have got. Now,
yes.
This is fantastic deceit. I wonder what some of the people here who perhaps enjoy the military history aspect of it feel about having an attraction to somebody who's done the worst thing imaginable.
I wonder if he's unique in that respect, whether there are people that have gained medals for not doing things. I'm certain there are.
I'm quite sure there are. Yeah.
And I don't think it's such a terrible thing to be frightened of being killed.
He doesn't really pretend anything. He just sits back and lets other people draw their own conclusions. He never pretends that he was a hero.
He's a passive deceiver.
In Afghanistan. Yes, exactly. But he's quite content when other people get it wrong.
I work in a military museum. I work in the National Army Museum in London, and that really brings home to you Dr. Johnson's famous axiom that every man thinks meanly of himself who has not been a soldier. Flashy's been a soldier, and he's done a lot of things that you can look at as being quite brave. He does risk his neck on a couple of occasions.
Only if he has to.
Absolutely. Wouldn't anybody? I wouldn't do it if I didn't have to, surely. So, yeah, I can see why he looks on himself as a coward. On many occasions, his cowardice does shine through. But there are times when he does things that I think are quite remarkable that I wouldn't have the nerve to do. Purely, of course, I agree entirely that it's of necessity. He has no option other than to do them.
Yeah.
But still, he's been in the cannon's mouth, which a lot of people haven't.
People have written to me and said he is not a coward, he is a hero. In fact, and he's just terribly modest.
What do you say in reply to that?
I say, you're wrong.
Yeah, but I think his character develops, because if you go to the scene in Cawnpore when the Victorian gung-ho crowd are deciding what they want to do, and he, I think, puts forward quite sensible and clever strategy, which he attributes to his cowardice, but I think it's really a good thing that he's thought out and a good thing that he's done.
Oh, that, and I mean, he realises that. The irony of that situation is that he actually proposes the honourable and soldierly thing, but he does it because he is scared stiff and wants to survive, and he sees that's a much better chance of survival.
You were a soldier yourself in the Far East in the Second World War. I mean, you understand what that kind of fear is, don't you?
Yep. Oh, I think everybody's scared. I mean, you can't not be. I think there are people who enjoy it. I mean, I've seen them, but everybody's scared. Yeah.
To what extent did your own experience of the British Army during wartime, which I'd like to think was very different from the British Army of the mid-19th century, but I suspect wasn't, but to what extent did that influence the way you depicted the relationships between Flashman and his fellow officers?
Tell us first exactly where you were and what you did, George.
I was an infantryman in Burma in the 17th Indian Division. This was in 1945. I was a very young soldier indeed. We broke through the Japanese lines that took a place called Mektilla and had to hold it. And that was extremely interesting. It was. That, when I look back on it, it was frightening. I learned a great deal about myself and about my fellow soldiers, the Cumbrian borderers of the 9th Battalion Border Regiment. They were terrific.
What did you learn? That they had strengths that they didn't believe they had, or you didn't think they had?
In the book that I wrote about it, quoted safe out here, I said at one point that the highest praise that a soldier could get nowadays was the word professional, and that 14th Army were not professionals, they were experts. And it's a fact, they were just very expert fighting soldiers, far better than the Japanese.
You obviously very much enjoyed a Victorian military history. Why did you decide to explore that in a fictional setting rather than as a straight academic history, for example?
Because writing fiction is much more fun than writing straight history, and it was bound to be the Victorian military period if I was going to write about Flashman, because he was expelled from school in the late 30s, and there is the Victorian era just opening up in front of him, all the campaigns. And that really dictated the line of march, so to speak.
And it's a period that people appear to find terribly attractive. Was that what you were going to...
Well, what I was going to ask is, Flashman is steeped in history of the middle of the 19th century, and he tells us in the first novel, and indeed in other novels, of the campaigns he's involved in and the like. Did you set out a sort of chronology for him at the start, or did that develop?
No, I was writing one book. That was all I intended to write at that time. I wrote it very quickly. It took 2 years to get published. It went round the world practically. Everybody rejected it until Herbert Jenkins took it. And by then, once they'd accepted it, I thought, we'll do a sequel. So I did another, but I never expected to do a series.
You paint a delicious portrait of Cardigan, who of course is a historical figure. I'm just wondering how much of that is fact and how much is your invention?
Oh, I hope the character is entirely factual. I mean, the dialogue, obviously, between him and Flashman is invented, but I hope it's an accurate picture of Cardigan, who was not to blame for the charge of the Light Brigade, although everyone blames him for it. But he was an ass, and not a terribly nice man. But after there again, try to be as fair as possible.
Young chap here, and then the gentleman there who's patiently been raising his hand for the last few...
I wanted to ask you about your relationship to history. Is this consciously an alternative history?
I'm not sure. I'm determined to be as historically accurate as I can, and when Flashman deviates from history, I put in a footnote to say that this is exactly what he's done. But I try to be as accurate as possible. I've always maintained, and I found this in research, you'll learn far more from a contemporary novel than you will from a history. I mean, you'll learn far more about Victorian London from people like Dickens, or 18th century Scotland from people like Scott, writing fiction.
Could I just suggest that as someone who had absolutely no interest in history when I was at school, a good 30 years back now, that what you have here is some way of delivering history to a younger sect in a way that they can absolutely eat up and enjoy. And speaking for myself, the first Flashman opened up a new horizon of history for me. I would never have known about the Indian Mutiny or the slave trade or all these sort of aspects had the delivery not been in the way it was.
You do see history as a kind of narrative adventure, don't you?
Oh, it is the great adventure story. The great thing is that history does the work for you. I mean, if you're going to do a thing about the Indian Mutiny, I simply thought, what are the great moments in the Indian Mutiny? Get him from one to the other. And he managed to get to quite a few of them.
Now, you talked about working at the National Army Museum. I think you were there really because of these books in a strange way, aren't you?
It's absolutely true. If I hadn't read the Flashman papers when I was a teenager, it wouldn't have opened up this interest in Victorian military history, which has led directly to me being employed as an education officer at the National Army Museum. And that is a huge responsibility because it's being able to tell about soldiers' lives throughout history, and that comes directly from reading these books when I was a young man.
Soldiers' lives, that's a good phrase because it is about soldiers' lives, isn't it? You're listening to Book Club on BBC Radio 4 with George McDonald Fraser discussing his novel Flashman, the first in the 12-book Flashman Papers series. Yes?
I really enjoyed the book, but isn't the focus on Flashman just emphasising a laddish culture, which, as a young woman, I'm already fed up of?
I suppose he is laddish, so far as I understand what laddish means.
Yes, it's probably a pretty good description of him. I mean, laddish behaviour in a uniform.
He's selfish and he's fairly callous, and particularly towards women. I must point out, incidentally, about women, most of the time they get the better of him. Nearly always.
They're up to the
He
task.
runs up against very strong women, admittedly.
It's my introduction to Flashman, this. Linking the questions about the female perspective, whilst you said most females got the better of him in the end, there was one lady that didn't get the better of him, despite the fact that he didn't get to rape her the second time when he wanted to. I'd like to ask you, what does your daughter think of her father writing about women in that way?
She's all for it. Well, she reads them and she writes her own novels. She's written about 10 so far. Asked what they were about, she replied, law and sex. But,
Chip off the old block?
Sort of. No, Caro has always, as far as I can make out, approved of them. And indeed said she was delighted with the last book, that he was as nasty as ever.
Forgive me, I don't want to categorise you as a woman.
I am a woman.
Indeed you are. Because I wanted to raise the whole side of the book, which is the way Flashman deals with women. Now, he's attracted to women, clearly, young, old, and in between. And he treats some of them pretty badly. What do you make of it?
It's a good job he wasn't alive in the 60s.
It certainly is, yes. He wouldn't...
I think it's appalling, and whilst I don't approve of the potential of what his wife's behaviour is at the end, he deserves it.
But some of the women behaved pretty badly
well, they
as well.
did, but then again, it was the era as well where women were second-class citizens, lumps of meat or whatever, in perception.
So it doesn't bother you?
It does bother me a lot. Like I said, it's a good job he wasn't alive in the 60s, 70s.
But in terms of the book, it doesn't.
It does bother me. It does bother me reading it, but I also associated it with the time and the character.
Thank you, yes.
Do you think that through some of your portrayal of Flashman as a character and his kind of comical and humorous portrayal that you give, you sometimes condone his actions, his cowardice? And I remember distinctly after his rape of one of those female characters, he says something like, it has its points. And do you think that could be construed as condoning rape and his cowardly actions?
He only does it once, in the first book. And
do you think that you're condoning his actions in some way?
I'm not, no.
No.
Oh, no, I'm not responsible for the way he behaves.
Do you actually like Flashman?
No.
And in Burma, would you like him to be your company officer? If he'd been moved since 1945 to the...
No, because you can't rely on him. I mean, he's just not trustworthy, you know.
Do you often feel that he's there, sitting alongside you in the corner of the room? You don't?
No, thank God.
I was wondering, would you actually like to go out for a drink with him?
No. No, I don't think so.
Do you ever feel any guilt that your great character is somebody that you wouldn't want to give the time of day to?
Certainly not guilt. I've been asked, a gentleman there asked, did I like him? And I say no. And when I finish a Flashman book, I know I'm never going to write another. I've known that 11 times because I get fed up with him. And it takes a year or so before I think, oh, well, why not?
I wondered actually whether the character of Flashman had mellowed as you yourself had aged writing the books. I first noticed it in Flashman and the Mountain of Light when he felt different. He seemed different, certainly very different to the Flashman in the first book.
That is quite true, I think. I was in my 40s when I wrote the first book. And Mountain of Light, I must have been at least in my 70s, I think. You couldn't keep the same tone. And anyway, I don't think he would, because he ages as he's writing. I reckon that when he started writing in his 80s and probably went through into his 90s.
Reading the first book, I don't feel that Flashman goes on anything that you could describe as a personal journey. Would you agree with that?
A personal journey? A physical journey, yes. A sort of moral, spiritual journey? No.
Things happen to him?
Things happen to him. Mostly against his will.
At the end of Flashman, he's the hero of Afghanistan. He's been decorated by the Queen. He comes home. He's worried he's a cuckold and he has to borrow money from Elsbeth. Was that your way of not letting him get away with it?
I think the short, accurate answer to that is yes. He doesn't get away with all that much. He gets away with a reputation. But there is a downside for him always.
Do you think there's a moral thrust to the books at all? I mean, is there anything... I'm not suggesting that you sit down with a great moral message that you want to impart, but do you think there's an element of moral fable in them at all?
If you want to think there is, then there is. The Tablet, the Roman Catholic journal, devoted a front page to him. And I didn't quite understand it all.
You could say he gets his comeuppance, couldn't you?
They did think there was a moral dimension to him. And various American writers have said that there is... I wouldn't know.
Did you ever consider any other villain instead of Flashman who would have been at a suitable time? I'm thinking of somebody like Dickens's Artful Dodger, who would have been a bit of a nasty villain. Did you ever consider any other else?
No. I know that somebody wrote books about Alan Breck in the United States.
The kidnapped character?
Yeah. I haven't read them. But I remember thinking, yes, this is something that can be done.
But I suppose the point about Flashman was that he would go into the army. The Artful Dodger would never have gone into the army. No. And in some ways it had to be a military subject for you. I mean, that was the way your mind was going, wasn't it?
Yes. It's difficult to write about the Victorian period, for me at any rate, without going into the military. And of course that's where Flashman would go. He's good for nothing else.
Do you not consider it the irony of all ironies in terms of current events that Flashman should end up in Afghanistan, where he's trying to be killed by Ghilzais, and you'll have to forgive me for quoting here, but I think he said dedicated to the militant expansion of Islam in the book.
Is that so?
And the fact that about 35 years on, you should have touched such a nerve at such an early stage.
The Guardian, when they went into Afghanistan, said Bush and Blair must read Flashman before they go any further, which I was very pleased to see.
We keep talking about the Victorian period, and of course that brings us to the personage of the Queen herself, who appears in the book towards the end, giving him his medal, which we know he doesn't really deserve. And she does it in the presence of Prince Albert and the stony-faced Duke of Wellington.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the interesting things is that you almost poke fun at the Queen, certainly at Prince Albert, and at the Iron Duke. So there's no sense of terrible deference to these characters. There is quite a sort of strong element of almost comic humanity about it.
I have a tremendous admiration and respect for the Duke of Wellington. I think he was terrific. He really was good at what he did. But, of course, Flashman, seeing him at close hand, and Flashman being the kind of person he is bound almost to look for any sort of weak points or anything that he can send up or have a sneer at, because that's his nature.
Were you happy with the Royal Flash film?
At the time, Dick Lester saw it, I think, more as a comedy than I did. I mean, I think of Flashman as an adventure, which I hope is told in a humorous way. But it's grown on me, I must say. I saw it about a year or two ago, and I thought, that's not bad. I mean, the beauty of it is the tiny parts in it, played by people who were unknown then, who are now big stuff. David Jason is a station master, and I don't know if he even has a line. And there's a beautiful little cameo by Bob Hoskins as a Cockney police sergeant. No, I like Royal Flash.
You once wrote a Bond screenplay, didn't you, Octopussy?
I did.
Was that a natural adjunct to Flashman, do you think?
Not really. I don't know why I got the job. I think I'd done a screenplay for MGM for Paul Newman, which never got made, but which they'd liked, and I think I was imposed on the Bond people by the MGM moguls.
What sort of an experience was that?
It was great. It really was. It was good fun. The great thing about doing a Bond screenplay is that, unlike any other screenplay, you know the movie's going to get made. and you know that everything is going to be taken care of, and you know that you're working with first-class people.
Do you enjoy other historical fiction like Bernard Cornwell? Because he devoted his, dedicated his last book to you.
Bernard has been very, very nice to me. He dedicated his last book to me. Yes, now, what I admire about him is the prodigious amount of research he does. I mean, that's most impressive. And I know how much work you have to do to get that kind of expertise.
You've said earlier that writing historical novels is more fun than writing pure history. When you'd done the first two Flashman books, you wrote your magnificent history of the Borders, the Steel Bonnets, which is obviously a subject close to your heart. But I wondered if there'd been other things that might have tempted you off the path of your fiction.
I would have loved to write a history of the Buccaneers, but I would have had to be able to speak French, Spanish, Dutch, and probably a bit of Latin. It would be a lifetime.
Even Glasgow Academy couldn't equip you for that.
Even Glasgow Academy couldn't equip me with that.
Last one.
It's an obvious question. I think when you look at Flashman's CVs, there are some gaps in terms of the books that haven't been written yet. The American Civil War, and although you touched on Mexico in your last one, not the detail of what happened to him. Have you plans to write any more books to finish him off?
God willing, I'll carry on with him. I'm investigating various lines of approach at the moment, 2 or 3 subjects, but whether I'll pick on one of them or something else, I just don't know.
Because you very much whet the appetite as you go through.
Thank you.
He will return.
I hope so.
George McDonald Fraser, thank you very much indeed for being our guest on this month's book club.